There's a man on the TV, says he's working for the Lord. Back then I changed the channel, 'cause the righteous can leave me quite bored.
Welcome, brothers and sisters, to another episode of the Alison and Adreana Podcast. I'm your co-host, Adreana Langston, here in sunny Long Beach, California.
And I'm Alison, joining you from Los Alamitos. We are so glad you're tuning in today.
That's right. And today we're diving deep into a topic that is incredibly close to my heart. And I know, Alison, it's a huge concern for you too, given your extensive work with parents of neurodivergent children. We're talking about the ongoing attacks on public education, specifically how the current administration's policies are threatening the very foundation of our public school system.
It's a critical conversation, Adriana. As someone who has spent years helping families navigate school districts to get the resources their special needs children require, I've seen firsthand how fragile these support systems can be. Any shift in policy, especially at the federal level, can have devastating ripple effects on the ground.
Exactly. And it's not just about abstract policy changes. These are real families, real children whose futures are on the line. We want to share some of their stories with you today because the human cost of these policy shifts is immense.
We read about Jolene Baxter, a single mother in Oklahoma City, in a May 2025 article from the 19th News. Her 8-year-old daughter, Marley, was born with a heart defect and suffered a stroke after her third open heart surgery, which significantly affected her cognitive abilities. Though in second grade, she struggles to read and primarily attends classes with other children with disabilities. Marley's essential care, including physical, occupational, and speech therapies, is covered by Medicaid. The 19th News reported that Jolene has relied on Medicaid for Marley's medical expenses and disability protections under the Department of Education as a critical safety net. Jolene recounted to the 19th News, "I'll do everything I can at home, but she'll just fall through all the cracks, and she won't get the education that she deserves." She even homeschooled Marley for 2 years when public schools couldn't meet her needs, an option unavailable to most working parents. The article noted that Jolene now harbors no faith that the federal government will hold schools accountable for discrimination against children with disabilities if the education department is disbanded.
And we also read a powerful story in a February 2025 Chalkbeat article about Jessie Damroth from Newton, Massachusetts. Her 17-year-old son, Logan, has autism, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and other medical needs. Logan was participating in a program called Charting My Path for Future Success at Newton Public Schools, which was funded by the U.S. Department of Education. This program was designed to provide extra support for high schoolers with disabilities in planning for life after high school. The Chalkbeat article quoted Jessie saying that Logan needed that extra support to really reinforce that he could do this. For the first time, Logan was enthusiastically discussing career options in science and, potential college studies. But the Trump administration abruptly terminated the Charting My Path program, along with more than 200 other education department contracts and grants as part of a cost-cutting initiative. The administration justified these cuts by deeming the spending wasteful or fraudulent or in service of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility goals that President Trump sought to ban. The Chalkbeat article highlighted that for Jessie, the cancellation of parent support meetings through Charting My Path was particularly distressing. She expressed her heartbreak, feeling that the decision was not well thought out, and emphasized Logan's desire to achieve his life goals, which requires the necessary tools and support.
And then there's Pam Nichols in Macon, Georgia, whose story we watched on PBS NewsHour in July 2025. Her 14-year-old son, Spencer, has Down syndrome. Pam told PBS NewsHour that Spencer loves taking care of his farm animals at home, but his school day offers him little autonomy as he spends almost his entire day in a small classroom with other students with disabilities. Spencer himself described his experience as kind of rough, though he learned some days with his mother's help. Pam believes he's denied the same chance to succeed as his non-disabled peers, stating that he cannot choose his own elective classes and is not progressing as he should. She highlighted that the 6 students in Spencer's class are all taught at the same level, and she has to advocate for Spencer to use the library and data from testing to show he can read at a 3rd or 4th grade level, which she considers appropriate. Pam argued that this stalls his development and doesn't prepare him for society. She believes Spencer should be in more general education classes, but his middle school lacks the necessary resources and staff. Pam recounted an instance where Spencer's science teacher suggested he color during the science test instead of learning the material, despite Pam's desire for him to learn. Pam Nichols expressed fear about the proposed cuts, especially since the public school system is Spencer's only option in Macon. She emphasized that early intervention services have enabled children like Spencer to learn to read and do math, becoming meaningful contributors to society, and that a little bit of extra support goes a long way. Spencer himself has ambitions of owning a home and working in the restaurant industry, and Pam is committed to fighting for his quality education.
These stories and so many others underscore why we need to pay close attention to what's happening with our federal Department of Education. The changes being made and those planned have direct and profound impacts on the lives of our most vulnerable students.
The core of the current administration's vision for education is to significantly diminish the federal footprint. Project 2025, a comprehensive blueprint for a potential second Trump presidency, explicitly outlines plans to strip the federal role in education down to that of a statistics gathering agency that disseminates information to the states, as reported by the Heckinger Report in July 2025.
And this isn't just about reducing bureaucracy. The plan includes direct calls to eliminate the Department of Education entirely, or at least to break up the education department and disperse any surviving higher education programs across other agencies, according to the National Education Association, or NEA, in August 2025.
Education advocates are sounding the alarm. Susan Nogan, a senior policy analyst for the NEA, warned in an August 2025 statement that such a restructuring would create an imperial presidency served by party loyalists who will replace the skilled civil servants. Jacqueline Simon, policy director of the American Federation of Government Employees, echoed this concern, stating, "The question is, do you want people with the skills, expertise, and credentials to perform their jobs, or do you want people who love Donald Trump?" as quoted by the NEA. This suggests that political allegiance rather than expertise would be the primary factor for employment, potentially leading to a decline in effective oversight.
And it gets worse. Project 2025 also plans to prohibit collection of demographic information needed to document inequities. So if parents of Latino students or Black students or disabled students want to show with stats that their students are being underserved as compared to the same types of students in other states, too bad, so sad, because that national data will not be being collected and collated. The Trump administration also proposes a massive 67% cut to the Institute of Education Sciences, or IES, which houses the National Center for Education Statistics. This is according to an August 2025 report by First Focus on Children. This move would severely hamper the federal government's ability to track student data, identify disparities, and inform evidence-based policy. It's almost as if they don't want us to see the problems.
A critical function of the Department of Education is to protect students from discrimination through the Office for Civil Rights, or OCR. Project 2025 proposes moving the OCR to the Department of Justice and stripping its enforcement authority, allowing it to be able to enforce only through litigation, as detailed by First Focus on Children. This would severely weaken its ability to protect students against discrimination based on race, gender, and disability, leaving few, if any, staff to enforce civil rights laws, according to the NEA. The American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU, in August 2025, also highlights that thousands of civil rights cases have already stalled or been dismissed.
Beyond dismantling federal oversight, the administration is aggressively pushing for private school vouchers and what they call school choice. The One Big Beautiful Bill, a major tax and spending package signed by President Trump, includes a national school choice provision that provides a federal tax incentive for families' educational expenses, including private school tuition at secular and religious schools. This was reported by K-12 Dive in August 2025.
Project 2025 explicitly promises a federal voucher law modeled on Arizona's program, which is characterized as one of the largest voucher programs in the nation and one of the most unaccountable, according to First Focus on Children. The stated goal is to subsidize the private, oftentimes religious, education of wealthy students at the expense of the nearly 90% of U.S. students who attend public schools, as stated by the ACLU. The projected cost to the federal government could reach $101 billion per year if 43% of taxpayers participate, according to K-12 Dive.
Robert Kim, executive director of the Education Law Center, stated in an August 2025 report that studies have shown private school vouchers sweep aside civil rights protections, support segregation, decimate public school budgets, and do not improve student outcomes. He added, vouchers undermine public education, the cornerstone of our democracy, and have no place in federal policy. Ed Trust, a nonprofit focused on students of color, even nicknames the One Big Beautiful Bill the Great American Heist, because it will spend billions in public money to subsidize wealthy families accessing private schools with little oversight.
And Rachel Laser, president and CEO of Americans United for Separation of Church and State, expressed concern that the school choice program will divert billions of taxpayer dollars to private religious schools that indoctrinate and can discriminate against students and their families based on the school's beliefs. As reported by K-12 Dive, Project 2025's model states like Arizona have seen taxpayer-funded school vouchers used for ski passes, golf equipment, and lessons on how to drive a luxury car that costs more than $800 per session due to non-existent accountability, according to the ACLU.
Finally, the administration is pushing for ideological control and censorship in curriculum. Project 2025 explicitly aims to codify book bans and classroom censorship on a national level. It defines LGBTQ+ content as porn and treats librarians like criminals as highlighted by PEN America in August 2025. It also seeks to excise critical race theory and gender ideology from curricula in every public school in the country, according to K-12 Dive.
PEN America states that Project 2025 would turbocharge educational censorship across the country, taking the educational gag orders already enacted in many states to the federal level. This creates a greater climate of censorship and self-censorship on schools and college campuses, and silences educators and students all on a national level. This is a direct attack on academic freedom and intellectual diversity.
In our next segment, we'll delve into the long history of conservative attacks on public education, exploring the ideological reasons behind these efforts and how they've evolved over time. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Alison and Adreana Podcast. We've just discussed the current administration's plans for the Department of Education. But to truly understand what's happening, we need to look at the long game. This isn't a new fight. It's a decades-long coordinated effort by the conservative right to reshape public education.
That's right, Adriana. At the heart of this current push is Project 2025, a massive policy document from the Heritage Foundation. As Insight into Academia noted in August 2025, it's a 900-plus page roadmap for a potential new conservative presidential administration covering nearly every aspect of government, including education.
And the people behind Project 2025 are not just academics. Many have been appointed to key positions within the Trump administration. For example, Dr. Kevin Roberts, the president of the Heritage Foundation, is a central figure. He explicitly stated in a March 2025 White House article that from the moment it was created, the Department of Education was a mistake. It was founded on the false premise that unelected bureaucrats in Washington know better than parents and local communities when it comes to educating children. In a July 2024 interview on Real America's Voices War Room, Dr. Roberts referred to the current political climate as the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be, indicating a strong ideological stance against progressive policies. He has also stated that children suffer the toxic normalization of transgenderism with drag queens and pornography invading their school libraries, reflecting a key cultural concern driving conservative education efforts. His vision for education, as outlined in a Heritage Foundation report, emphasizes human flourishing and liberal arts that are meant to educate for liberty, which he contrasts with critical race theory and Marxist claptrap. He believes that public school education should be based on a compelling vision of the founding and natural law. Critics such as The Emancipator argue that Roberts' message is resolutely anti-American, promoting a God-appointed monoculture and seeking a country filled with Christian automatons.
And Dr. Lindsay Burke, the lead author of the education section in Project 2025, is now the Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy and Programs at the U.S. Department of Education, as announced by the Heritage Foundation in August 2025. Dr. Burke has been a vocal advocate for winding down overly prescriptive federal intervention in local schools, empowering parents with choice and transparency, and limiting ever-ballooning higher education subsidies, as she stated in an October 2024 interview with Rick Hess. She argues that protections for civil rights and students with disabilities predate the agency, meaning they'll remain in place after it's gone. downplaying the federal role in ensuring inclusive education. And when she talks about ever-ballooning higher education subsidies, she's specifically targeting federal student loan programs, including the elimination of public service loan forgiveness, arguing that many government and nonprofit employees would no longer have working Americans paying off their master's degrees.
And get this, Alison, Dr. Burke, in a December 2024 Heritage Foundation commentary titled, "Here's How to Actually Reverse the Baby Bust," co-authored with J.P. Green, argued that U.S. higher education policies provide enormous incentives for more people to attend universities, take longer to complete their degrees, leading to an artificially extended adolescence that significantly reduces fertility rates. She even noted that among women with a bachelor's or higher degree, nearly twice as many, 21.8%, will never have children compared to who ended their formal education with a high school diploma, 11.5%. This shows a clear ideological link between education policy and demographic goals. The Heritage Foundation, through Dr. Burke's work, explicitly states that government policies often produce unintended consequences that promote behaviors that are antithetical to family formation. They believe that by stop-hopping, putting the government thumb on the scale in favor of policies that push people into life paths that postpone or disincentivize starting and growing families, fertility rates will rise. This includes discouraging higher education for women and promoting religious education, which they believe fosters pro-fertility values. When you break this down, what it comes down to is Christian nationalist ideology that basically wants to create, let's state it outright, more white babies.
More white babies in families where it is always and only a mother and a father. Daddy works, mommy stays home and cooks and cleans and makes more babies. And it is all how God ordained. And all that is just fine. It's just not just fine when one group is purposely trying to squeeze each and every one of us into that box, whether or not it is our choice to live like that. It's not just about policy, it's about a worldview. The conservative opposition to public education is deeply rooted in ideological motivations. Adreana, have you ever heard of Christian Reconstructionism?
I mean, I personally have heard about it because before I was a progressive Christian, I was raised in a much more conservative, high control church that preached some of this stuff. So break it down, Alison, break it down.
Christian nationalism is a theological framework. It goes like this. There is going to be a rapture. There are going to be tribulations. And Jesus Christ is going to return in as a deity, not as a human. Jesus is going to return to rule over his kingdom on earth. But human society has to create that kingdom before Jesus will come back. It's like, hey, I'm the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. I'm not coming back to a dirty house. Clean this mess up, get stuff straightened up before I get there to sit on the throne. And for these right-wing Christians, the filth that needs to be cleaned up is any and every way that people are living that doesn't suit their particular values. They want a national government explicitly based on Christian tenets to coerce people into living the way they think is moral. As detailed in a 2000 Site Cirex document, Reconstructionists view public schools as bastions of state-sponsored sin and a major impediment to their theocratic agenda.
They advocate for the deinstitutionalization of public education through mechanisms like unrestricted vouchers, charter schools, and homeschooling. And alongside that, they push for the re-Christianization of schools. They want Christmas trees at school replaced by creches with baby Jesus. They want prayer in schools. They want the introduction of creationism and the removal of multiculturalism and comprehensive sex education from curricula. This is all part of a long-term vision for a Christian nation.
And it's also about the free market. Conservatives believe private enterprise is inherently superior to public services. And this principle directly informs the desire to shrink the public education sector. As Rethinking Schools highlighted in an undated article, privatization efforts are also strategically aimed at undermining teacher unions, which are seen as a key base of support for the Democratic Party. Terry Moe, a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, explicitly stated in a 2010 interview with the Heartland Institute that a main motivation of some of the choice supporters was to weaken public education unions.
This isn't just about today's culture wars over critical race theory or gender identity. The U.S. Christian right's significant involvement in education politics began in the 1970s, heavily influenced by events like the desegregation of public schools following Brown v. Board of Education in 1954. Historically, Southern states created private school vouchers, specifically to allow white students to avoid integration by attending private schools, often termed segregation academies, as Senator Bernie Sanders' June 2024 report points out.
And this historical context is crucial. An intriguing observation from a September 2015 article in the Journal of the History of Education Society reveals that in the 1920s, many educational conservatives actually looked hopefully toward greater federal involvement in K-12 education because they believed more top-down control would advance a uniform program of Americanization. This stands in stark contrast to today's calls for reduced federal involvement.
That's right, Alison. It shows that the conservative position on federal involvement isn't consistent. It is pragmatic, not dogmatic. They support federal intervention when it aligns with their goals and oppose it when it doesn't. It's about ideological alignment, not just federalism.
And let's not forget the money. Wealthy conservative donors have a long history of funding initiatives that undermine public education. Senator Bernie Sanders' June 2024 report, By the Wealthy, for the Wealthy, the Coordinated Attacks on Public Education in the United States, and explicitly states that conservative billionaires are funding a coordinated effort to dismantle public education to pay for private school vouchers that largely benefit wealthy families and enable corporations to avoid paying their fair share of taxes.
These efforts are fueling the creation of two segregated K-12 education systems, a private and public one, as the Sanders report warns. And as a July 2025 Time article points out, the draconian cuts to public education caused by vouchers can lead to school closures, disproportionately impacting schools in Black and brown neighborhoods.
Conservatives toot the term school choice, but that's just marketing. The studies document inequities and lack of accountability associated with many private school programs. This appealing language effectively masks the underlying systemic impact of diverting public funds and weakening the universal public education system. They talk about parents having freedom, but again, it's just marketing specifically to garner support among low-income voters, Black voters, and Latino voters. What's really going on is an agenda that fundamentally transforms public education into a market-driven, less regulated system that most of those very voters could not afford to escape, even with a voucher. Because private school tuitions are so high, critics call it a backdoor way to destroy public education. And instead of outright saying public schools teach stuff that we think is from the devil and we want to destroy them, they won't say that because it would turn voters off, right? They talk about choice, so that they can undermine the public education system from the inside by draining funds from it through the support of vouchers and by degrading it in the minds of the voters. This has been more effective for them than trying to destroy it by outright legislation. But now, with Trump in office working this 2025 plan, they are using outright policy and legislation to destroy public education.
And this isn't just theory. We've seen these policies incubated at the state level. For example, in Dover, Pennsylvania in 2004, the school board voted to require ninth grade science teachers to read a statement questioning the validity of evolutionary theory, stating, because Darwin's theory is a theory, gaps in the theory exist for which there is no evidence. This was an attempt to introduce creationism into science class, despite the fact that as of 2024, all 50 US states and DC include the teaching of evolution in their public school science standards, and none teach intelligent design or creationism in science classes. Another conservative favorite that gets workshopped at the state level is ditching full spectrum sex education for abstinence-only sex education. And when it comes to sex education, states that prescribe abstinence-only programs in public schools have significantly higher teenage pregnancy and birth rates than states with more comprehensive sex education. A 2011 study published in PLOS ONE found that increasing emphasis on abstinence education is positively correlated with teenage pregnancy and birth rates. This clearly shows that prescribed abstinence-only education in public schools does not lead to abstinent behavior and may even contribute to the high teen pregnancy rates in the US compared to other industrialized countries. We've also seen efforts to impose traditional marriage and gender roles right into school curriculum in some of these GOP lead states. Like you said, they workshop these policies at the state level, and now they are taking them national. In Florida, the Parental Rights and Education Act, often called the Don't Say Gay law, prohibits classroom instruction on sexual orientation or gender identity from kindergarten through third grade and restricts it in higher grades. Now, this might sound reasonable, like why would the teacher be talking to third graders about sexual anything, right? But what ends up happening is all the little picture books that show a puppy with two grown male dog dads doing nothing sexual, mind you, just starring in this school puppy play, get pulled from the third grade classroom. The little girl bear that wants to dress in overalls like the boy bears pulled, it's just a promotion of prejudice. This law, signed by Governor Ron DeSantis, has been criticized for creating hostility toward LGBTQ plus people, with a 2023 UCLA School of Law study finding that 90% of parents who disagreed with the law felt it provoked hostility toward LGBTQ people.
It carries over to junior high and high schools as well in some of these conservative states and school districts. Like in some social studies curricula, there have been lessons that rigidly define gender roles, teaching students that men were breadwinners and women were homemakers, expected to keep a clean home for their husbands, supported their husbands, and gave birth and raised their children to grow up and accept these same gender roles. These are the types of ideologically driven policies that conservatives want to force on all schools nationwide, often under the guise of parental rights or traditional values.
In our next segment, we'll explore how the ongoing attacks against teachers' unions are deeply intertwined with this broader conservative strategy, particularly concerning political funding. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Alison and Adreana podcast. Before the break, we discussed the long history and ideological underpinnings of the conservative attack on public education. Now, let's connect that to another key target, teachers' unions.
That's right, Adriana. There is a long history of conservatives and the GOP being anti-union specifically because they witnessed unions donate more money to DNC candidates than to GOP candidates, or donate more to the DNC as a whole. The point was to cut off these funding sources. The hostility towards the teachers' union is no different. This creates a direct parallel to strategic motivations observed in other conservative movements like tort reform. Where this is most clearly broken down is in this report we recently looked at called Deconstructing Political Rhetoric, Conscience and Identity in Policy. A professor named Carolyn de Cruz from La Trobe University in Australia wrote it.
De Cruz's report is pretty rich. She says major teachers' unions, such as the National Education Association, or NEA, and the American Federation of Teachers, or AFT, are widely recognized as significant donors to the Democratic Party. De Cruz's analysis of their political spending consistently reveals an overwhelming alignment with Democratic causes. For instance, in the 2021-2022 election cycle, the four largest public sector unions, including the NEA and AFT, collectively spent over $700 million election-related activities, with nearly 96% of their PAC money directed towards Democratic candidates and causes.
This isn't just about policy. It's about political power. Conservative groups and Republican lawmakers explicitly target teachers' unions, viewing them as a powerful wing of the Democratic Party and openly seeking to gut money from the unions who support Democratic candidates and issues. As de Cruz states in her report, legislative efforts in states, such as those in Pennsylvania, aim to undercut the power of public sector unions by making it easier for workers to opt out, harder to form unions, and more challenging for unions to raise money for political work.
And this isn't a new tactic. Think about tort reform. De Cruz indicates that a significant underlying impetus for the conservative push for tort reform, particularly under the George W. Bush administration, was to undercut tort lawyers due to their consistent and substantial donations to the DNC. Karl Rove, a key strategist for George W. Bush, recognized that trial lawyers were at the top of that list of the biggest givers to the Texas Democratic Party in the 80s and the 90s.
De Cruz says the battle over tort reform evolved into this giant pitched battle because it wasn't just necessarily about the kind of verdicts, but it was also about the back end, which was the financing of the entire Democratic Party. Republicans effectively deployed the trial bar as a boogeyman in state politics, enabling them to portray Democratic candidates who accepted money from trial lawyers as being in the back pocket of the trial bar.
This is a direct parallel to what we're seeing with teacher unions. The Janus versus AFSCME Supreme Court decision in 2018, which ruled that public employee unions could no longer collect fees from non-members, was a real come up for anti-union groups. These groups, often funded by prominent conservative donors like the Koch family foundations and Betsy DeVos, launched widespread campaigns after the SCOTUS decision to persuade teachers to drop union membership. De Cruz says they weren't on the down low about their goal. They explicitly stated they were aiming to gut money from the unions.
What conservatives are doing today to teachers' unions is just a replay of what they did with tort reform back in the day. In both instances, a key Democratic donor base, trial lawyers and teachers' unions, respectively, is explicitly targeted not just for policy reasons, but to diminish the union's ability to help Democrats by donating funds and by acting as organizers. Back then, conservative marketing was the demonization of the trial bar. Today, anti-union conservative marketing is painting teachers' unions as promoting radical ideology and being out of step.
You're right, Alison. And all of it is part of a long-term political strategy by the GOP to undermine the financial infrastructure of the Democratic Party. It's not just about reducing funding. It's about eroding public trust and support for unions by associating them with unpopular or radical ideas. This is propaganda which sways voters to support the passage of anti-union legislation purposely meant to decrease union membership. They want to undermine unions' actual political power, and they want to undermine the perception of unions in the public discourse.
In our next segment, we'll specifically address how these changes to the Department of Education, both instituted and planned, will impact students who are on individualized learning programs, students with disabilities, and other marginalized groups. We'll see you after the break.
Yeah, we used to go to Los Cerritos Park, right there on Country Club Drive in Virginia Country Club. We used to go at night. The girls would come to Scarabs and Zane. They'd come. The boys would lean on this one tree. We'd pull their pants down. They'd be facing the tree. They're behind glowing white.
Welcome back to the Alison and Adreana Podcast. Before the break, we discussed the long history and ideological underpinnings of the conservative attack on public education. Now, let's connect that to another key target, teachers' unions.
That's right, Adriana. There is a long history of conservatives and the GOP being anti-union specifically because they witnessed unions donate more money to DNC candidates than to GOP candidates, or donate more to the DNC as a whole. The point was to cut off these funding sources. The hostility towards the teachers' union is no different. This creates a direct parallel to strategic motivations observed in other conservative movements like tort reform. Where this is most clearly broken down is in this report we recently looked at called Deconstructing Political Rhetoric, Conscience and Identity in Policy. A professor named Carolyn de Cruz from La Trobe University in Australia wrote it.
De Cruz's report is pretty rich. She says major teachers' unions, such as the National Education Association, or NEA, and the American Federation of Teachers, or AFT, are widely recognized as significant donors to the Democratic Party. De Cruz's analysis of their political spending consistently reveals an overwhelming alignment with Democratic causes. For instance, in the 2021-2022 election cycle, the four largest public sector unions, including the NEA and AFT, collectively spent over $700 million election-related activities, with nearly 96% of their PAC money directed towards Democratic candidates and causes.
This isn't just about policy. It's about political power. Conservative groups and Republican lawmakers explicitly target teachers' unions, viewing them as a powerful wing of the Democratic Party and openly seeking to gut money from the unions who support Democratic candidates and issues. As de Cruz states in her report, legislative efforts in states such as those in Pennsylvania, aim to undercut the power of public sector unions by making it easier for workers to opt out, harder to form unions, and more challenging for unions to raise money for political work.
And this isn't a new tactic. Think about tort reform. DeCruz indicates that a significant underlying impetus for the conservative push for tort reform, particularly under the George W. Bush administration, was to undercut tort lawyers due to their consistent and substantial donations to the DNC. Karl Rove, a key strategist for George W. Bush, recognized that trial lawyers were at the top of that list of the biggest givers to the Texas Democratic Party in the 80s and the 90s.
DeCruz says the battle over tort reform evolved into this giant pitched battle because it wasn't just necessarily about the kind of verdicts, but it was also about the back end, which was the financing of the entire Democratic Party. Republicans effectively deployed the trial bar as a boogeyman in state politics, enabling them to portray Democratic candidates who accepted money from trial lawyers as being in the back pocket of the trial bar.
This is a direct parallel to what we're seeing with teacher unions. The Janus versus AFSCME Supreme Court decision in 2018, which ruled that public employee unions could no longer collect fees from non-members, was a real come up for anti-union groups. These groups, often funded by prominent conservative donors like the Koch family foundations and Betsy DeVos, launched widespread campaigns after the SCOTUS decision to persuade teachers to drop union membership. DeCruz says they weren't on the down low about their goal. They explicitly stated they were aiming to gut money from the unions.
What conservatives are doing today to teachers' unions is just a replay of what they did with tort reform back in the day. In both instances, a key Democratic donor base, trial lawyers and teachers' unions, respectively, is explicitly targeted not just for policy reasons, but to diminish the union's ability to help Democrats by donating funds and by acting as organizers. Back then, conservative marketing was the demonization of the trial bar. Today, anti-union conservative marketing is painting teachers' unions as promoting radical ideology and being out of step.
You're right, Alison. And all of it is part of a long-term political strategy by the GOP to undermine the financial infrastructure of the Democratic Party. It's not just about reducing funding. It's about eroding public trust and support for unions by associating them with unpopular or radical ideas. This is propaganda which sways voters to support the passage of anti-union legislation purposely meant to decrease union membership. They want to undermine unions' actual political power, and they want to undermine the perception of unions in the public discourse.
In our next segment, we'll specifically address how these changes to the Department of Education, both instituted and planned, will impact students who are on individualized learning programs, students with disabilities, and other marginalized groups. We'll see you after the break.
We'd pull their pants down. They'd be facing the tree. They're behind glowing white in the moonlight. 'Cause we'd do it during a full moon, you know. We'd get that paddle out. It was like an oar from some old boat that had been sanded and painted with our sign on it. We'd get that paddle
Welcome back to the Alison and Adreana podcast. We've talked about the broad strokes of the conservative agenda and its historical roots. Now, let's bring it back to what matters most, the direct impact of these changes on our most vulnerable students.
This is where my work with parents of neurodivergent children really comes into play, Adreana. In an August 2025 report, the Center for American Progress said the Trump administration's policies, including the proposed elimination of the Department of Education, put disabled students at substantial risk of losing fundamental protections provided by the Rehabilitation Act, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and the Americans with Disabilities Act, abbreviated to the ADA. And even if I hadn't read that report, I'd say the same thing just from experience. These parents depend on these programs to help their kids on their educational journey.
That's clear from the stories we talked about at the top of the podcast. The Trump administration claims the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act funding itself would be preserved at current levels. Education advocates don't believe it. They are very concerned about the proposed reorganization into single separate grants aimed at letting states spend the money as they see fit. They are concerned about the indicated transfer of special education programming from the Education Department to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. K-12 Dive-In magazine talked about these concerns in their August 2025 issue. Critics fear that without the oversight of main federal departments like the Department of Education, the grants would go to the states, but not necessarily get spent on helping the education of kids with special needs.
Experts and advocates fear that such a shift is short-sighted, offensive, and unacceptable because it segregates students with disabilities from school-based resources and support and risks promoting a medical model of disability, according to a nonprofit news article from August 2025. So now parents won't be going to the school and saying, hey, my special needs child needs support for her learning journey. Let's talk about what support resources are available. Parents now have to go to the doctor with this kind of conversation. Let me ask anyone out there, is it easier to get an appointment with your doctor or with the principal at your child's school or your child's teacher? This approach, while claiming preservation, fundamentally alters the delivery mechanism and oversight of these critical services.
And the Office for Civil Rights, or OCR, which is crucial for enforcing the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and Section 504, has already lost nearly 50% of its staff. Part of the whole DOJ gutting, plus the anti-diversity efforts of this administration, this severely diminishes the ability of the department to enforce those rights and leaves few, if any, staff to enforce civil rights laws, according to an August 2025 article by AAPD. Consequently, thousands of civil rights cases have stalled or been dismissed.
This means that even if laws like the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and Section 504 remain on the books, good luck getting them enforced due to lack of resources. No enforcement means no protection for vulnerable students. So if an individual student's family does not have the money to hire a lawyer capable of suing the school district, too bad, so sad. You just keep getting discriminated against, or you wait and wait and wait for some ambitious law firm to file a class action suit on behalf of everyone in your child's position. And while that case works its way through court, your child passes the years being underserved in K through 12. The concern is the ability to file discrimination complaints with the DOE's Office of Civil Rights since the Trump administration has taken over. All of those complaints have been put on hold. And a lot of families are very concerned about the future of the Office for Civil Rights.
The impact extends to low-income students. Project 2025 plans to eliminate Title I funding entirely and replace it with no strings attached block grants with zero regulations or oversight, as stated by the Center for American Progress. If you think that block grant funding will end up funding the needs of underserved Black students, I have a bridge to sell you. This would undermine the academic outcomes of 2.8 million of the nation's most vulnerable students. Furthermore, Project 2025 calls for the end of the Head Start program, which served 833,000 children in fiscal year 2022 and would end universal free school meals that provide food security to millions of children, according to the NEA. It is seriously cruelty built into legislation.
NEA President Becky Pringle states that gutting the department would lead to less resources for our most vulnerable students, larger class sizes, fewer special education services for students with disabilities, and less civil rights protections, as quoted by the NEA. These cuts are not isolated. They form a comprehensive strategy that impacts low-income students at every stage of their educational journey.
And it impacts teachers too. Again, the Center for American Progress found that removing Title I funding would worsen existing teacher shortages by wiping out up to 6% of the workforce concentrated in low-income communities. Cuts to federal support would make workloads heavier and conditions more difficult for teachers in high-poverty schools, where teacher turnover is already highest.
It's not just K through 12. Access to higher education would also be severely threatened. Project 2025 would curtail student loan forgiveness and repayment programs, eliminate the Biden administration's income-based repayment plans, and end federal student debt forgiveness for public service workers, which has so far cleared $69.2 billion in student debt for 946,000 borrowers, according to the NEA. This would deny student debt relief to more than 3.6 million public service workers and saddle them with an additional $250 billion in student debt. This debt is most likely to fall on students of color.
And for our English learners, the budget would eliminate the $890 million English language acquisition program, which the administration says encourages bilingualism and de-emphasizes English primacy, as reported by K-12 Dive. This reveals a cultural and linguistic bias embedded in the policy, implying an attempt to enforce a monolingual cultural norm. If this funding is withheld, school districts serving over 5 million K-12 English learners nationwide will need to find alternative funding sources or risk violating the law, as reported by Education Week in July 2025. Long Beach Unified School District student body is made up of nearly 17% English learners.
And at Rossmore Elementary, right by me, 12% of students get free lunch. This is why the forum at First Congregational Church of Long Beach is so important. We need to understand these impacts and how we can advocate for our students.
In our final segment, we'll give you all the details about the upcoming forum and what questions we hope Dr. Tiffany Brown, Deputy Superintendent of the Long Beach Unified School District, will address. We're so glad you're here, and we hope you stick with us. Welcome back to the Alison and Adreana Podcast, and thank you for joining us for this crucial conversation about the future of public education.
We've covered a lot today, from the specific policy proposals of Project 2025 and the current administration to the historical context of conservative attacks on public education and the very real impacts on our most vulnerable students.
The point of us telling you all this was, of course, to educate you.
And the point of getting yourself informed about an issue is so that you can take action.
And the action to take is to attend an education forum at my church, First Congregational Church of Long Beach. It's the oldest church in Long Beach, and it has been a bastion of progressive Christianity and the social gospel the whole time.
Listen, we know not everyone is Christian like us or even has a faith, and we don't care. This forum is still for you. It takes place after the church service and is not even in the sanctuary. It is in a side room.
Yeah, First Congregational Church of Long Beach is located in downtown at 241 Cedar Avenue, 90802. The forum is in the Koinonia room. It is wheelchair accessible.
The forum is on Sunday, August 17th at 11:30 a.m. The main panelist is Deputy Superintendent of Long Beach Unified School District, Dr. Tiffany Brown. She is specifically going to talk about how we can support students in the face of these attacks on the Department of Education.
241 Cedar is literally 3 blocks from where the Metro Blue Line ends. If you drive, you can park in the city-owned parking lot on Broadway between Cedar and Chestnut, and First Church will validate your parking ticket from that lot.
Also, when First Congregational Church says all are welcome, they mean it. Go into the video description and you will find a link to a flyer for the event. On that flyer is an email. If you have accessibility needs, email that address to discuss your needs with them. The church really will try to accommodate people because they want the full community to participate.
And if you really can't make it down here to 3rd and Cedar, that is okay too. Like Alison said, download the flyer from the link provided and shoot an email to that church contact email address on the flyer to get the Zoom room entry code, because there will be a Zoom room option to see the forum live. Dr. Tiffany Brown will take questions as well.
Adreana and I have some questions we really hope Dr. Brown addresses at the forum. For me, as someone who works closely with parents of neurodivergent children, I'm particularly interested in understanding how the proposed changes to Individuals with Disability Education Act funding and the Office for Civil Rights will specifically impact the availability and quality of special education services in LBUSD. I want to know what contingency plans the district has in place if federal protections are weakened or funding is significantly reduced.
And from my perspective, as someone deeply invested in social justice, I want to know how the district plans to protect students from the ideological attacks we've discussed today, especially regarding curriculum censorship and DEI initiatives. How will LBUSD ensure that all students, particularly those from marginalized backgrounds, continue to receive an equitable and inclusive education, even if federal oversight is diminished? I also want to know what steps the district is taking to ensure that any potential funding cuts don't disproportionately harm our low-income students and English learners.
These are critical questions, and we encourage all of you to attend the forum on August 17th to hear them discussed and to participate in that discussion. Educate yourselves, engage with your community leaders, and let your voices be heard.
That's right. Your presence and your questions matter. This has been the Alison and Adreana Podcast, and I'm Adreana Langston in Long Beach, California.
And I'm Alison Evers in Los Alamitos, California. Thank you so much for listening today. If you got something out of this podcast, please be sure to give it a thumbs up.
Check out the video description to this podcast for links to all our sources. We have receipts, baby.
Girl, yes, we do. We spent time researching all this.
Be sure to let us know your thoughts about the future of public education in the comments, and make sure to hit that subscribe button. We'll see you next time.